CGTN, China Global Television Network. Live from London, this is Global Business.
Hello, welcome to the programme. I'm Jamie Owen.
And I'm Robin Dwyer. Our top stories. The death toll from the earthquake in Turkey and Syria passes 22,000 amid frantic efforts to rescue the last survivors from the rubble.
The kindness of strangers. Emergency teams from around the world join the race against time. Chinese search and rescue teams speak of shocking destruction.
International organisations warn of a deepening humanitarian crisis if international sanctions on Syria are not lifted.
Our other headlines: Russia fires missiles over Moldova as Ukrainians are urged to take cover from some of Moscow's heaviest rocket attacks.
Frantic attempts to rescue the last survivors from the earthquakes in Turkey and Syria are continuing as the death toll tops 22,000.
A family of 6 has been pulled alive from the rubble in the Turkish city of Iskenderun after 100 hours trapped underground. But emergency teams say the freezing weather means it's unlikely that many more victims will survive. International search and rescue teams are on the ground and pledges of aid have been pouring in. The World Bank says it'll give $1.7 billion to fund reconstruction.
Turkey's president has admitted for a second time that his government's response to the disaster has been found wanting. Erdogan, who faces an election in a few months, was speaking on a trip to Adıyaman, one of the area's worst hit. He says his government will use the state of emergency imposed in the 10 affected provinces to crack down on what he called opportunists, who he accused of robbing markets and attacking businesses. Erdogan also pledged aid for those who'd lost their homes.
Maalesef son tespitlere göre
despite the fact that we have gathered perhaps one of the largest search and rescue teams to the region with more than 141,000 members, unfortunately, it is the fact that we have not been able to respond as fast as we hoped. But we will provide our citizens who do not want to stay in tents with houses by paying their rents.
Well, the international response to the earthquakes has drawn in emergency teams from countries around the world. Search and rescue teams from China have been working in Turkey. CGTN's correspondent Mikhail Bardavid reports.
I'm in central Malatya, one of the cities that have been hit on Monday's earthquakes. At least 300 buildings were destroyed in this city alone. Now, the Chinese Blue Sky rescue teams have been working since the early dark hours of Friday morning. In this wreckage site behind me, they believe that there might be still one woman and her daughter trapped inside. Just a short moment ago, there were rescue dogs here trying to detect where they might be. The Chinese team wants to enter from the right location. They have excavators here. They have been working for the last half hour trying to clear the path a little bit for the rescue teams to be able to enter more freely.
Now, the biggest difficulty here is that we don't know the exact information about the people who are buried. We have to clean up the large building structure before we can go inside to take a look. In fact, I'd previously experienced a big earthquake in China. But when I saw the impact of the earthquake in Turkey, it was very shocking with such vast destruction.
It's now been 104 hours since the earthquake took place, so we're in critical hours, but they believe that there still might be hope for these 2 people to be rescued alive. Mikhail Bardavid for CGTN in Malatya.
The scale of the deaths in Turkey and Syria has been described as biblical. The losses are almost too difficult to imagine.
But amidst the tragedy, there are stories of hope and survival and the kindness of strangers who keep working to find survivors. Our correspondent, Senza Yuan, has been following a Chinese rescue team.
So just a few minutes ago, China search and rescue team as well as Turkish search and rescue team have found a woman who survived after almost 100 hours of being under rubble. The people here are cheering up, especially they're so excited seeing someone survive, especially being able to dig her out of the rubble in the next few in this today. So this really cheers up the people here.
We had to drill a hole in order to send the audio and visual signals in there. A local Turkish guy then started to talk with the trapped person. Through her voice, we confirmed that she has strong life signals and she's about 2 to 3 meters down in the debris. We are now working hand in hand with Turkish firefighters to pull her out.
The reason why I'm wearing my mask is because there are so many building collapse. So when the wind blows, all the dust begins to blow in the air. So that's the reason why they asked me to wear the mask on. I want to show you that. Look at this location that we are at right now. You can see this area is kind of crumbled. I believe this is their garden originally. And then if you take a look at the building behind me, it's also collapsed, and you can see the air conditioner fan is also dropping to one side. However, in comparison, if you take a look at newer building on my left-hand side right here, it's still standing on its own, even though you can see the ceiling and some of the structure, it's kind of being shaken. However, the entire structure still can be able to hold together if you take a look at the neighborhood. And I also want to take you around to see, this is the building that I was just pointing at, and then on this side of the building you can see majority of the people are actually standing there and trying to see if they are able to dig out any. Some of them come out to look for example, if their blanket, some of the goods from their home, so that they can take it with them to keep themselves warm. This is what it looks like just within a block. So you can see how severe the damage is caused by this two times of earthquake.
That was our correspondent Senzu Yuan reporting.
More than 3,300 people are known to have died in Syria so far. Already ravaged by 12 years of war, the country's northwestern provinces of Aleppo, Idlib and Latakia have been hardest hit by the earthquake. Beset by food shortages, economic collapse and a cholera outbreak that spread across the country's 14 provinces, Syria's national infrastructure has been in crisis for years. Before the earthquake, more than 4 million people depended on cross-border aid for their day-to-day survival, and nearly 3 million were at risk of hunger. 14 aid trucks have arrived in quake-hit areas of Syria, but getting humanitarian aid into rebel-held areas in the northwest is difficult. The Syrian government allows aid through one border crossing with Turkey, which has also been damaged. Mohammed Hadi is the United Nations Regional Humanitarian Coordinator for the Syria crisis. He says the UN is launching an urgent appeal.
The situation, as you can imagine, before the earthquake, it was extremely bad. Syria is a country where 90% of its population below poverty line. In the northwest alone, you have more than 4 million people that were dependent on and still dependent on humanitarian aid. Now, on top of that, what we have is this earthquake that made the lives of the people much more difficult. Our teams have been operating in Syria for the last 10 years, but the nature of the aid corresponded to the crisis and to the war. Now we are in a situation where finding ourselves, we still have to provide aid to those victims of war, yet we need to tweak our humanitarian programs to respond to the earthquake and its devastation.
So what are the particular challenges of getting aid, this new kind of aid, to where it's needed within Syria?
Absolutely. It's always the logistics, the access, and some bureaucratic impediments that we are working on. For example, the road from within Turkey, in the southern part of Turkey, which enabled us to do the cross-border operation, was disrupted for 2 days. The road was damaged. There were rubbles on the road. We could not move our convoys. Luckily, the road managed to be cleared within 2 days. And yesterday, our first convoy passed. And today and tomorrow, our convoys will continue rolling. from Bab el-Hawa, which is a cross-border point from Turkey, which is in line with the Security Council resolution. Also, we're working to expand on the cross line from government-controlled area to the west, of course, the northwest of Syria. Likewise, with reaching people in the northeast and in the government-controlled area. So we're basically trying to provide aid and assistance, us, United Nations, and the international community as a whole, with the NGOs and the local NGOs. We're trying to reach people, doing our best to reach them in those most difficult conditions, let alone, on top of everything, the weather has not been helping us. It's raw, it's cold, snowy, freezing temperatures. We really feel bad for the people who are suffering.
So food, blankets, medicine, protection. What about funding, though? Is enough resources being allocated to Syria?
I'm really happy that you asked this question because I was going to talk about it. Just want to say that even last year, we only received less than 50% of our funding needs for Syria. This year, we also started with financial deficit. Now, on top of everything, we have those crises. We're appealing to the world to provide us with financial assistance as soon as possible. The condition of the people is really heartbreaking. People cannot wait. We need to move fast and swift. We're coming up with a flash appeal in the next 24, 48 hours. I think the Secretary General will be speaking, of the United Nations will be speaking about it in the next 24 hours. We're appealing to all donors.
What about sanctions? They are, of course, in place for a reason in Syria. What effect have they been having on aid getting through?
I can assure you that we're working with all parties concerned to make sure that sanctions do not impact our humanitarian work. This is nothing new to us. We've been doing that for many years. I personally have been involved in that, and we'll continue our engagement to make sure that sanctions do not become an obstacle. But it's not only sanctions. As I said, it's sanctions, it's bureaucratic impediments, it's obstacles. It's a lot of issues sometimes that come between us and between the speed that we would like to reach out to the people. But we're doing everything we can to make sure nothing comes in our way. We know when you're in the business of saving lives, you have to try your level best every day. It's not about the people that you reach. We are proud about the people that we reach, but we're always concerned about the people that we don't reach. That one woman, that one child that we missed on that day. This is what we focus about. Success is good, but in our case, failure is a catastrophe.
Well, among the hardest hit in Turkey, the southernmost province of Hatay, many are trying to cope, of course, with overwhelming grief, while for others it's a feeling of despair, waiting for help to arrive. Our correspondent Natalie Carney reports.
Rescue workers pull a sheet to protect those looking on. This is the sign that the person inside did not make it. Another dead body was pulled from the rubble 3 days after the initial deadly quake. The body of this 34-year-old man's wife was recovered only hours earlier. Their family wails in grief nearby.
They were a young couple in their early 30s with their entire lives ahead of them. Now, 2 more names being added to the growing list of those who have lost their lives in this devastating earthquake. Here in the province of Hatay, victims are screaming out for more help to come urgently.
A quick drive down the main street of the province's main city, you get a sense of just how much that help is needed. Everywhere you look, buildings have been either partially or completely demolished, rendering them uninhabitable, leaving the majority of the city's population out on the streets. Aid organizations have set up temporary shelters, but it is clearly nowhere near enough yet. 10 minutes from the city center, this tent is currently the only real shelter 50 Hatay residents have at the moment. Mothers, fathers, children.
The most important thing is that we need a place to stay. We need a soup kitchen. We need to warm up. The weather is very cold. There are people sleeping outside in the greenhouse.
The number of buildings destroyed is 60 to 70% of the city. More than half of it is very difficult for people to imagine. It is very, very high. The most important thing is shelter, electricity, water, things people need to live.
According to Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan, Hatay city has suffered some of the most destruction and loss of life, with well over 3,000 dead as of Wednesday. He added that over 21,000 personnel from the military, gendarmerie and police are working in the province. Many more have been sent to other devastated locations, such as Kahramanmaraş. International aid organizations have also faced geographical challenges getting to Hatay at the end of long, winding mountain roads. Those that are there appear to be focused mostly on the city center, leaving victims in the outskirts questioning when their help will come.
Help is in other cities, but they forgot about this place. Despite the great loss of life in Hatay, they concentrated on other areas. They abandoned such an urbanized city as Hatay.
No help came to us. Aid has started as of today, but we have not received any help yet.
It's not enough because our neighbors are still under the rubble 3 days later, and unfortunately they are not alive. It's too late.
As we were leaving, another aftershock hit the area, causing some that we were with to scream and run out onto the street. Their traumatization is palpable. Natalie Carney, CGTN, Hatay, Turkey.
You're watching CGTN. Still ahead. House for sale unless you're Chinese. The debate in the United States on who can and can't buy real estate.
Ever wondered what's the difference between a bear and a bull market? Where are the cash cows? And who are the lame ducks? And what exactly are black swans? Grey rhinos? And unicorn companies? Make sense of it all with Global Business, only on CGTN.
There's a new agenda for a new world, accelerating change in almost every part of our lives. It's shifting the norms of how we work, travel, and connect. How we think, interact, and develop. It's a new reality, a new agenda with me, Juliet Mann.
This week on Razor, a universal antivenom that could save hundreds of thousands from death and disability. And monitoring biodiversity using sound and artificial intelligence.
This microphone is recording the soundscape and all the different sounds from birds, amphibians, and then the data are uploaded to a cloud system, and there we can then analyze these sounds immediately.
Hello, welcome back to Global Business Europe. And a quick reminder, CGTN is available to watch for free on all of the major digital platforms, on Smart TV or online on Roku, Apple TV, Amazon Fire and Android TV, YouTube, Dailymotion, CGTN.com and the CGTN app, and in the UK on Freeview.
Well, it's now not long after 7 o'clock in the evening in Turkey. The sun has gone down, the temperature is dropping, but as you can see on these live pictures from the area of Gaziantep, search and rescue teams are still frantically trying to find any sign of life.
Well, let's talk to our correspondent, Trent Murray, who's in the Turkish city of Malatya. Trent, I guess it's human nature, really, to reach for these stories of miracles, but it has to be said, we are in the final hours of an active search and rescue operation, aren't we?
We are, Jamie, and I think rescue crews here and in some of those other cities know that very quickly it is now going to switch at some point from a rescue operation to a recovery one, but they are not giving up hope, and that is because we are still hearing stories, miraculous tales of survival from these ruins. We've heard in the past couple of hours, for example, the story of a toddler that was found with his 7-year-old brother. Amazingly, they were trapped under that crushed concrete for 105 hours, and yet they were pulled out alive and taken to a hospital. We understand they're in a stable condition. Of course, these rescue crews, I should say, have been doing this now around the clock for around 5 days. They're exhausted, they're tired. I think you can see a couple of them behind me there just getting some dinner. A lot of local charities and groups have opened up kitchens and are cooking for them. But I think, you know, with another night ahead of us, the temperature's dropping, that window of survivability is just now rapidly closing, sadly, but they're not going to give up until they're officially called to stand down.
I guess in the numbness of such enormous loss of human life, it seems almost impossible to talk about what happens next, but the President has been talking about the next chapter, and one credit agency has been talking about the reconstruction effort, perhaps costing $4 billion. What do we know about what happens next?
Well, there's been several suggestions and proposals which have been put forward by President Erdogan and his government. Of course, he's been touring many of the cities affected by these earthquakes over the past couple of days. In fact, he was in Malatya just a couple of hours ago, where he once again repeated his pledge to rebuild all of the homes that have been destroyed within 1 year. He was speaking to one woman who said, where are we going to live and what are we going to do? And he said, just give me 1 year and we will rebuild. Of course, it is an enormous task that he has set himself. But in terms of money, he says he is already putting aside around 100 billion Turkish lira for the rebuild. That is about $5 billion US. We're also, of course, seeing international partners wanting to chip in. The Greek government, Prime Minister Mitsotakis from there, has said that he wants to lead within the EU a donors conference. Of course, anyone that knows a little bit about the relationship between Ankara and Athens knows it can be a little bit prickly at times, and they like to trade barbs over different issues. But when there is a disaster like this, it seems they're putting aside those differences and coming together, and this country is going to need that, because there's just going to be an enormous amount of work done to rebuild and to help people pick up the pieces of their lives.
I guess that's for tomorrow and following days. Today, those who've lost their lives have been remembered at Friday prayers across Turkey.
Yeah, absolutely, Jamie. Of course, Friday being the most holy day of the week for the Muslim faith. A lot of people, of course, attending services across Turkey today will be mourning the dead and leading special prayers to remember those that have passed. I don't think you can see it now where I am because it's too dark, but behind those blue rescue tents there, which is currently acting as a bit of a tent city, sits what was one of the oldest and most historical mosques in this region of Anatolia in Turkey. Sadly, it really came crushing down because of the earthquake, and yet we still saw some people today praying outside. They had their prayer rugs with them in the snow. I think in all of the calamity and chaos and upheaval that they've seen, perhaps just a little bit of religious ritual is giving them some comfort to get through this very difficult period.
Trent, thank you for that. Our correspondent Trent Murray in Turkey.
Now for the rest of the day's news. And China has hit back at reports that some US states may try to ban Chinese citizens from buying property, saying the move would go against international trade rules and free market principles. Texas, Florida, Arkansas and several other states are debating a ban. China's foreign ministry says it would be detrimental to the United States.
Over the years, Chinese enterprises have made important contributions to the promotion of domestic employment and economic development in the US through their investments. Generalizing the concept of national security and politicizing economic, trade and investment issues violates the rules of the market economy and international trade rules and undermines the confidence of the outside world in the US market.
In New York. So, John, what more can you tell us about this potential property buying ban?
Well, Robin and Jamie, I've been monitoring this for the best part of the last 2 years, and it's a bit of a slow-burning story, but it keeps coming back in well-regarded television programs and also in newspapers of record as well. And it tends to refer to Chinese people and entities and corporations buying properties nearby to military installations. So particularly in the northwest of the country, where there are large nuclear installations. But to be frank with you, all over the United States there are military installations. And this story keeps coming up about people buying homes and farms. Farms feature a lot in this coverage, and also industrial units on industrial estates, as long as they are nearby U.S. military installations or under the flight paths of U.S. military installations. And the viewers and the readers are never left in any doubt with these articles, and that is, what are these Chinese people really up to? What is the real intention of buying a home nearby to a military base or an industrial unit, or indeed, as I said, a farm? Now, I will be honest with you, the balloon incident of last weekend has done nothing to promote China's cause in the United States at the moment. I'm not going to comment further on that because it's obviously very much an ongoing thing. But these proposals about banning Chinese people and entities from buying property across the United States come from the state level. So it's not Joe Biden's crowd in Washington, D.C. This is coming from the states themselves, and mostly Republican states in the south of the country, Florida, Texas, Arkansas, but states all over the United States are certainly very wary about China at the moment. And it's very important to understand that China is the new enemy here. It used to be the Russians. To a certain extent it still is because of what's happening in Ukraine, but China is very much in the crosshairs as far as the media is concerned. And an example of that would be, look at these screens here behind me. Just a few minutes ago, a big story with the banner headline, China Threat, China Rising, and a story about how apparently Chinese apprehensions at the border, the southern border, are up by some 800%. That's just in the last few minutes, and this is a daily occurrence here. Now, the politicians do nothing to stop this. They peddle this stuff all the time. It doesn't cost them anything to do it. It doesn't damage them, even if they have a large Chinese diaspora within their constituency. It generally doesn't hurt them and makes them look like they're rah-rahing and going to support U.S. security at all costs. So that's what's happening here. The Ministry of Foreign Affairs, as you quoted at the top of this, has been speaking. They're unhappy about it. They say such proposals are a violation of the principles of market economy. It's a story to watch very closely. Jamie and Robin.
And John, another relationship under the spotlight because Brazil's President Lula has arrived in Washington ahead of talks with President Biden.
Yes, now this is an absolutely key relationship for Washington, D.C. It's very important to understand that you're dealing with two of the 5 largest countries in the world and the 2 biggest democracies in the Western Hemisphere. And so I think the issue of democracy in Latin America and also climate change in particular, given the positioning of the Amazon jungle and its proximity to Brazil, are going to dominate the discussions. Now, one of the things we're hearing is it's possible the United States will make a contribution to the Amazon Fund that was started in 2009 by President Lula when he was first in power. It was blocked by President Jair Bolsonaro between 2018 and last year. It's been reopened by Lula. Countries like Norway, Germany, the UK are said to be keen to get involved to fund the rebuilding, the reconstruction of parts of the Amazon that have been damaged by deforestation. If America does go ahead and announce this today, there's no guarantee they will, by the way, but if they do at this meeting, then it will cement the relationship between the left-wing President Biden and the left-wing Lula da Silva. Biden had great difficulty with Bolsonaro, who was much more affiliated to Trump, as you know. Also on the agenda today, potentially environmental crimes. Biden's known to want to crack down on those. And when you look at the list of what is an environmental crime in the Amazon, it's quite long. Littering, oil spills, destruction of wetlands, dumping, contamination, misuse of pesticides and chemicals, burning, the provision of false data, bribery of local officials, and fraud. All of these things on the table. The meeting begins at 20:30 GMT today, or rather the arrival is at 20:30 GMT on the South Lawn of the White House. The meeting will be at 20:50 GMT today.
John, thanks very much. Our correspondent John Terrace in New York.
China's consumer inflation accelerated in January, spurred by demand during the Lunar New Year holiday and the country's easing of coronavirus restrictions. The consumer price index rose 2.1% year-on-year in January, slightly less than expected. Food prices, though, rose 6.2% for the month, accelerating December's 4.8%.
Pakistan and the International Monetary Fund will resume online talks next week after 10 days of face-to-face negotiations failed to unlock crucial bailout funds. Pakistan is in a deep economic crisis and its foreign exchange reserves are almost gone. The funds, which are part of a $6.5 billion bailout agreed in 2019, have been delayed since December.
Adidas says it could take a $1.2 billion revenue hit if it decides not to sell its remaining stock from Kanye West's Yeezy range. The German sportswear company cut ties with the rapper, who now goes by the name of Ye, in October after he made anti-Semitic comments. Adidas is deciding whether to repurpose the Yeezy stock. Shares fell 11% after that announcement.
The UK narrowly avoided falling into a recession in 2022, but the country's finance minister has warned it's not out of the woods yet. The economy flatlines between October and December. The Bank of England still expects Britain to enter a recession this year, but predicts it will be shorter and less severe than previously forecast.
Universities across the UK are out on a third consecutive day of strike action. Teachers and support staff say their pay has fallen behind inflation over the last 10 years and that the universities are refusing to negotiate.
Students will miss a lot of classes over the next 2 months, and some are demanding compensation from the universities. Our correspondent Andrew Wilson reports.
It's cold on the picket lines, but still something in the region of 150 universities in the UK have ground to a halt again. This is the third day of industrial action in a row. Like the nurses, this has been a reluctant decision that has been building over some years, but come to a head with the recent spike in inflation taking its toll on pay packets everywhere.
It's not that the money isn't there. The money really is there. Universities are sitting on about 40 billion of assets, reserves, but they just choose to not spend it on staff. The proportion of university income that has been spent on staff and students is decreasing year on year on year. Instead, it gets hoarded in reserves, nice fancy buildings, overseas campuses. All of that does nothing to support students and staff here.
As with other unions, there's been little communication with employers who have taken the government's lead and refused to negotiate. The government may be the target of today's industrial action, but with up to 150 universities affected and teaching hours radically reduced, over 18 days of stoppages planned for 2 months, students will be hit as well. It's not just their professors staying away from work. Union members include lecturers, caterers, cleaners and administrative staff, something in the region of 70,000 workers. But all those staff say their predicament comes from a decade of neglect.
So they have created this situation. It's not the staff. And now we're in a year of significant inflation. Staff have just had enough because they cannot cope on the wages that they're on, because over the last 13 years, they have just been reduced again and again. And every year we've been losing money and expected to take on more and more work each year.
Students have lost out, but many are sympathetic to the staff and are seeking compensation from the institutions.
What we're trying to do, we're not trying to put pressure on our professors. We're trying to communicate with the school because, as I said, I think professors have their right to express their feelings and fight for their interests. As students, we also have right to express our feelings towards the school and convey our, our desire, our needs to the school.
So far, no further comment from the government, but there are more strikes scheduled for later in the month. Andrew Wilson, CGTN.
You're watching CGTN. Still ahead, Moldova's government resigns amid a spiralling economic crisis and fallout from the war in neighbouring Ukraine.
Each day, there are millions of stories. Each one can open new perspectives, new possibilities. Wherever you look, we are there to see, discover, explore, We put the pieces together to find what really matters to you, all around the world, all around the clock. Our reporters are at home across the globe. From our headquarters in Beijing and production centers in Washington, Nairobi, and London, China Global Television Network. Stories from across the globe, reaching people across the globe. CGTN. See the difference. Facing the unknown is always difficult. In a world in turmoil, it's easy to lose orientation. But when the storms come, we have to see the possibilities. Reinvent. Find new opportunities. Discover a path forward. CGTN. See the difference.
What do we mean when we talk about the difference? The difference is in the detail, in the background,
defense ministers from
the wider angle and perspective of every story. Wherever the story may be. CGTN. See the difference.
Welcome back to Global Business Europe with Jamie Owen and Robin Dwyer. Our top stories. The death toll from the earthquake in Turkey and Syria passes 22,000 amid frantic efforts to rescue the last survivors from the rubble. And international organisations warn of a deepening humanitarian crisis if international sanctions on Syria are not lifted.
Well, let's talk to Paulo Pinheiro, chair of the United Nations Syria Commission of Inquiry. Paulo Pinheiro, welcome to the programme. Can you give us an idea of what, if any, aid is getting into Syria? What's your information?
My last information that happily today an envoy of 14 trucks was able to pass through Bab al-Hal. That is the only cross-border that is authorized in this situation. And yesterday there were also 6 other trucks. But this happens 3 and 4 days after the earthquake. Then this is one of the key threats, that everything will arrive too late. If it's already extremely difficult to have humanitarian aid in a conflict with 5 armies and many non-state armed groups, if this is difficult in the normal times, then you have this crisis on a crisis that is the earthquake.
You've called for a ceasefire in Syria. Is that likely? Is that realistic, do you think?
That is, we try to remind member states that they are supposed to overcome the diplomatic failure, monumental diplomatic failure, that is this continuation of this conflict for 12 years. I think that to prevent another if another crisis will happen, I hope not, I think that's very important that all the parties of the conflict must come to the table.
Some parties have called for international sanctions on Syria to be lifted. Would you join those calls?
That is, we are not advisors of states about sanctions, but I'm very happy to acknowledge that the United States for 180 days has suspended the constraints of the economic sanctions. That's something very positive. And I had also the European Union is doing the same thing concerning the 2 countries. Then I repeat the same thing. In normal times of the war, this sanctions, if they have a lot of humanitarian sanctions, they have a chilling effect on the humanitarian support in Syria.
We're starting to see international aid arrive in Turkey and international financial support. Realistically, is Syria going to see similar levels of support announced? And if not, what does that mean for the victims in Syria?
It's very important to say that the UN is inside Syria. That is, you don't have an empty in terms of humanitarian aid. But of course, the situation of Turkey is very much different, because in Syria you have an ongoing conflict for 12 years. But I am seeing some developments. I am aware that the Syrian ambassador in New York is in conversation with the Secretary General. The government has offered several possibilities of this aid reaching Syria. Then I think that slowly we are having some auspicious signals.
Paulo Pinheiro, Chair of the United Nations Syria Commission of Inquiry in Brazil, thank you very much for talking to us.
Thank you.
Moldova's Prime Minister has announced her government is resigning as the country struggles with the economic fallout of the war in neighbouring Ukraine. The resignation came just hours after Russian missiles crossed her country's airspace in Moscow's latest round of strikes. Kyiv said today's attacks hit power facilities in 6 regions, causing blackouts across the country. Well, let's talk to our correspondent, Will Denslow in Kyiv. So, Will, do we know if the Moldovan Prime Minister's resignation is linked to these latest Russian missiles crossing Moldovan airspace?
Well, Robin, first of all, on the question of those missiles crossing airspace, we've heard from several Ukrainian officials that maintain that these missiles crossed Romanian as well as Moldovan airspace. Of course, that has been refuted by Romania's defence ministry, saying that the missiles flew 35 miles from their airspace. We've heard from President Volodymyr Zelensky saying that the flying of these missiles presented a challenge to NATO members. Now, when it comes to the issue of Moldova, well,
I think we have unfortunately lost our connection to Will Denslow in Kyiv. No, sadly he's gone for the moment. Hopefully we'll be able to get back to him later on in the programme.
Well, let's try and pick up on some of those themes. How has the resignation of Moldova's government and the bombardment of Ukraine today been reported in Moscow? Our correspondent Stuart Smith reports.
First of all, there's no indication that any of these are linked, but indeed Moldova is unusually, certainly from here in Russia, in the news for quite a few different things. Let's start with the missiles first of all. Russia, at least the press secretary of the president, Dmitry Peskov, has said he's not going to comment on the allegations that a missile flew over Moldova. He's deferred questions to the Ministry of Defence, which so far hasn't commented, and it's unlikely anyone else will with the current so-called special military operation, meaning that only the MOD can comment on these kinds of matters. Indeed, because Moldova is not a NATO country, it's not expected there'll be any kind of escalation from this. But the previous time something very similar happened, when cruise missiles from the Black Sea flew over Moldova into Ukraine. That happened in October. There wasn't any repercussions then. There were, though, repercussions. One ambassador expelled from the Russian embassy in Moldova when a Ukrainian air defense missile ended up dropping fragments after trying to intercept a Russian missile. So Moldova does get brought into this conflict, even though it's not formally part of it. On to another, though, aspect of what's in the news here in Russia is that the Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky has apparently passed on intelligence to Moldova that Russia is trying to destroy, quote, the political situation in Moldova. The Kremlin says it has no idea what Zelensky is talking about, but we know the Russian Foreign Ministry is concerned that Moldova is looking to initiate closer ties with the West, either by joining NATO or more generally. And there is a region of Moldova called Transnistria, which Russia supports with so-called peacekeepers. It has a military presence there, and that borders Ukraine. So for Moldova, Russian relations are always very tricky.
Well, let's go back now to Kyiv and rejoin our correspondent, Will Denslow. So, Will, we were talking about the likelihood of the latest Russian missile strikes crossing Moldovan's airspace being linked to the Prime Minister's resignation. And also, there are warnings there could be more missile strikes to come.
Yeah, Robin, well, we've heard from Natalia Gavrilita in her resignation. She simply said that the time has come for her to resign. She said that no one expected the crises that Moldova faced during her 18-month premiership. Of course, Moldova has faced sky-high inflation and energy crisis fueled by the war in Ukraine, as well as the country getting to grips with the surge in Ukrainian refugees into its country. We've heard from the country's president, Maia Sandu, who said that the government acted responsibly, thanking the government for showing stability, peace and development, while others would have chosen bankruptcy and a war. We heard from the Prime Minister, the outgoing Prime Minister, I should say. She said that she believed in Moldova and she believed in its people. Now, when it comes to airstrikes here in Ukraine, well, just a few moments ago, the air raid sirens here in Kiev have lifted. This is at least the third time today. People, for much of the day, have been spending their time in shelters like the metro station here in Kiev. You can see behind me, and of course, it's reported that there have been at least 71 missiles fired into Ukraine so far this Friday. According to officials here in Ukraine, 61 of them have been shot down. Robin?
Will, thank you very much. Our correspondent, Will Denslow, in Kiev.
Now, Europe struggled with a water shortage for much of last summer. In Spain, the government's implementing a new $24 billion water management plan.
But it's caused tensions with the farming community who need water for their crops. Our correspondent, Ken Brown, reports.
Harvest time. Fresh oranges from Orihuela. This whole region of southeast Spain is known as the Garden of Europe. Most of this fruit is bound for export across the continent. But the farmers here are not happy. Productivity is down and a larger storm is brewing over a precious resource: water. The central government has just approved a plan to offer long-term ecological protection to rivers like the Tagus, whose flow is diverted hundreds of kilometers using huge hydraulic works to farmland in the southeast via man-made canals. The Tagus and its corresponding reservoir are only legally allowed to redirect the flow when the water level is above a certain limit. But that limit has now been raised, which will reduce water supply available for irrigation. Farmers here believe that this plan has not been thought through, and over 25,000 jobs could be affected if supply is reduced.
This is an absolute catastrophe for our local economy. 5,000 more people could become unemployed, and a lot of families will have to change what they do for a living.
The big picture is that there is less water to go around in Spain, but demands from intensive agriculture and sectors like tourism are huge. With climate change, longer summers and more intense periods of drought, experts are predicting that the available water could decrease by as much as 40% by 2050. The government plan is to reduce the supply to farmers over 5 years, supplementing the shortfall with a more efficient infrastructure and an increase in desalination. They have pledged nearly $25 billion nationwide to improve water management. But not everybody is on board.
The best solution is to keep things as they are regarding the flow limit in the Tagus. It's all been well planned and we can combine that with desalinated water. But desalinated water is no substitute for the water transfer. Right now that's not possible economically and ecologically speaking.
Last year saw drought emergencies declared across the continent with reservoirs falling to critically low levels. Freshwater management is not just a major issue for Spain, but for countries all over the planet. For now, it seems, there are no immediate solutions to preserving this most precious of resources. Ken Brown, CGTN, Alicante.
2 people, including a 6-year-old boy, have been killed by a car driven into a crowd at a Jerusalem bus stop. At least 5 other people were injured, one seriously, in what Israeli police are calling a terrorist attack. The driver was shot and killed by an armed civilian before the police arrived.
European Union leaders are bringing in tougher rules to make it easier to expel asylum seekers whose refugee applications have been declined. There were more than 300,000 border crossings last year, and there is growing concern about the low number of failed asylum seekers who were returned to their home countries. Commission President Ursula von der Leyen says 2 new projects will allow fast and fair asylum procedures at the EU's external borders.
China's President Xi Jinping has met Cambodia's Prime Minister Hun Sen during his visit to Beijing. President Xi said China would encourage more Chinese companies to invest in and start businesses in Cambodia, while also supporting transport infrastructure construction. Both leaders agreed to expand cultural exchanges and common development projects.
You're watching CGTN. Still ahead. The space race for Mars heats up, while the crew of China's International Space Station takes its first spacewalk.
Events have consequences. Words create impact.
Unprecedented scenes that we saw.
The clean-up operation is now well and truly underway.
Parts of southern Europe remain in a state of emergency.
Context gives meaning. People make history.
Far more than 1,000 people have come here today.
But authorities are still on high alert.
So now we've actually become the border on this road.
A complex world demands a comprehensive view.
But with the cleanup efforts more or less under control,
the economic impact is bound to ripple across the country.
There's plastic pollution everywhere.
Because the world today matters for your world tomorrow.
This is the living area of the crew.
The focus is firmly on future technologies.
Well, this is something completely different.
The world today, every day on CGTN.
Hello, welcome back to Global Business Europe. In American football, the Philadelphia Eagles play the Kansas City Chiefs in this weekend's 57th Super Bowl. And for the first time, each team will play an African-American athlete at quarterback.
It's a significant step forward, but one celebrated black former college quarterback says that when it comes to race, the National Football League still has a long way to go. Our correspondent Hendrik Sybrandy reports.
And I could have signed that thing.
It was 1991 when Charles Johnson quarterbacked the University of Colorado Buffaloes to a national championship. He was most valuable player in the Orange Bowl, the title game.
100 years ago, Hendrik.
One of those guys. It was a different time back then. Football quarterbacks, whether in college or in the pros, were almost exclusively white, and not by accident.
The quarterback position was considered the thinking man's position. It was an extension of the coaching staff. It's hard to face the fact that when CJ was a young quarterback, he was convinced at a young age that quarterback wasn't the path for me. I think we're at a different place now.
On Sunday, Philadelphia's Jalen Hurts and Kansas City's Patrick Mahomes will do something that's never been done before.
Have two black quarterbacks starting in the Super Bowl, I think it's special.
Yeah, I think it's history. I think it's something that's worthy of being noted, and it is history.
It's a huge deal. My face just lit up as you asked the question.
It sends a strong message, he says, to young black athletes.
Absolutely. There's more of an expectation that this is for me. And so in their minds, there's less of a threshold to have to cross. There's less of an impediment, which is progress.
At the same time, while some 60% of players in the National Football League are black, only 3 out of 32 teams currently have black head coaches, despite a rule requiring teams to interview at least 2 diverse candidates.
We can't quite seem to break the threshold where it's just accepted.
In addition, until recently, race-based measures made it harder for retired black players to get concussion settlements.
I think there was a headline, was in the New York Times last year, says, does the NFL have a race problem? So does the NFL have a race problem?
Does America have a race problem? And depending on your perspective, whatever the answer is to the first is in fact the answer to the second.
Johnson says it's owners putting blacks in positions of power, not prescribed rules, that will make a difference in the end.
This decision, by and large, comes down to the comfort of 32, primarily men, in making this decision.
NFL owners need to be bolder?
Absolutely. We have to be resolute and determined in our minds that we're not going to put up with it anymore.
He says Super Bowl 57 represents a real step forward.
Progress is progress.
But he thinks Hurts and Mahomes are still judged differently than their white counterparts.
I still think today we identify African-American quarterbacks by their physical skill set, by their athleticism primarily.
Johnson! We haven't crossed the goal line, he says, when it comes to race.
Quite frankly, the journey for black quarterbacks continues.
A journey he helped pioneer way back when. Hendrik Sabrandi, CGTN, Denver.
SpaceX has tested its most powerful ever rocket, known as the Super Heavy Booster. It's one half of the Starship craft, which is due to make its first orbital flight in coming weeks. The test wasn't a complete success as two of its engines failed to ignite. The rocket is at the center of SpaceX's plans to send a spacecraft first to the moon and then to Mars.
Meanwhile, Blue Origin, owned by Amazon founder Jeff Bezos, has won a contract from NASA to explore Mars. It will use its New Glenn orbital launch vehicle in a mission to study solar wind energy next year. The award is part of NASA's tendering process involving 13 companies and is seen as an effort to encourage private competition.
And two crew members of China's space station have conducted their first spacewalk. The Shenzhou 15 astronauts completed a 7-hour assignment to install new equipment, including a set of extension pumps for a Space Lab module. Ground Control said the crew had covered long distances in a rather challenging environment.
Europe.cgtn.com has all the week's top stories from China. Here's a quick take.
The Lantern Festival marked the end of the New Year holiday season in China, and millions tuned in to watch the gala show. Work is progressing on a mega project to send water from the rainy south to the north of China, which is prone to droughts. Taikonauts have successfully completed their first spacewalk in the China's space station. At least 3/4 of new public vehicles are set to become electric in various pilot areas across China. Since 2017, the giant radio telescope in Guizhou province has detected more than 740 pulsars, which are fast-spinning neutron stars. 5 areas have been designated as cultural ecology protection zones. This adds to the 7 originally granted the status in 2019.
The headlines again. The death toll from the earthquake in Turkey and Syria passes 22,000 people amid frantic efforts to rescue the last survivors from the rubble.
International organisations warn of a deepening humanitarian crisis if international sanctions on Syria are not lifted.
And one other headline for you. Russia fires missiles over Moldova as Ukrainians are urged to take cover from some of Moscow's heaviest rocket attacks so far.
And that's it for Global Business Europe. Thanks for watching.
More on all of our stories at europe.cgtn.com, and do follow CGTN Europe on Twitter, Facebook and Instagram.
We're on smart TV apps, Roku, Apple TV, Amazon Fire and Android TV, YouTube, Dailymotion, CGTN.com and the CGTN app, and in the UK on Freeview.
Coming up next on CGTN, it's Africa Live. We'll see you again on Monday. Same time, same place. From all of the team in London, it's goodbye.
Goodbye.